Hey guys, the Urban Omnist here. I am really sorry it's been so long, but frankly, I've just been incredibly busy. But I am back, and today we're going to talk about Jesus Christ. Now, he's been under a lot of debate lately, not necessarily his teachings per se, but more his very existence. Is Jesus Christ an historical individual? Did he really exist? Well, I used to study this sort of thing quite a bit, and there's really a few different angles and a few different ways that you can look at this. Number one, he is mentioned quite a bit in the Gospels. Those are probably the most notable. These were people who supposedly actually knew him. He's mentioned later on in the New Testament by Luke and Paul and other people, retrospectively, sometime after his death. We're not entirely sure exactly how long. If you read the Apocrypha, there's some talk about him. The pseudepigraphical books, which a lot of people don't necessarily count, but they talk about Jesus Christ. The Gnostics talk about Jesus Christ. He is mentioned in a number of different books. The question, of course, being, yes, but did any of these people really know him? And that's a tough one, because obviously some of those books were just more about the myth of Jesus, and or we presume them to be more about the myth of Jesus than the actual historical Jesus. We don't necessarily know on some of those writings. We don't really know for sure on any of those writings. Flavius Josephus is someone who mentioned Jesus Christ. He was a Roman Jewish historian, and people take him to varying extents. He's certainly been questioned on some things. Did he really know what he was talking about? One would have to wonder, well, why would he make something like that up? Why would he talk about this supposedly historical figure because after all, he was writing the Maccabean times, and so it wasn't that long after Jesus Christ. And so, why wouldn't he know something about it? But there's many debates on the subject. He is alluded to, possibly, in several other Roman writings, but for the most part, that's about it. He isn't really mentioned anywhere else. And so a lot of people, there's one article I read recently which talked about how the entire Christian faith was created by the Romans. They wrote it in Greek for whatever reason, and obviously did quite a bit of embellishing just to try and get people to pay their taxes. Now, Jesus doesn't really talk much about taxes. There is this one time when one of the Pharisees comes up to Jesus and he says, who should we pay this money to? And he says, give unto Caesar what is Caesar, and unto God what is God's. And I think that is essentially what they're basing this entire thing on. I don't know how that would explain the entire New Testament, but it's an interesting idea. For the most part, I think that they're simply questioning him because there's only so much said about him in history. Now, to some extent, I think this is a bit like Shakespeare. During the last century, they started questioning whether or not Shakespeare actually wrote his plays, or at least there's a group of people who have all these theories about who really wrote the Shakespearean plays. And regardless of the fact that he wasn't questioned as having written his plays all the way back to when he died. No one ever questioned it during all those years. And no one, to the best of my knowledge, really questioned the historical Jesus either. So that would be one way of looking at it. Why doesn't anyone else mention him? Why is he not mentioned in Jewish writings? Why is he not mentioned in Roman writings? Those are certainly the people who would have been talking about it. Why is Josephus the only one that mentions him? I don't know. There are two very good possibilities. Number one, it is possible that both the Romans and the Jews were a bit embarrassed about the whole thing. After all, the only Romans who really knew about it were the ones ruling Palestine, basically Pilate, who was governing Palestine, and all of his men. And it's possible he didn't really want to talk about it. He sort of swept it under the rug. It's possible that the Jewish leaders at the time didn't really want to talk about it, and they sort of swept it under the rug. And even though people knew about it, it wasn't mentioned in the records. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that no one really cared. I mean, it's funny that in this day and age, it's hard for us to imagine Jesus Christ not mattering, but really, he wasn't a big deal. I mean, I say that with all reverence, but he wasn't a big deal. He was a carpenter who preached for 3 years. 3 years, that's it. Just 3 years. He saw very few people in his life. His disciples, supposedly, 4 of his disciples anyway, wrote gospels about him, and of course there's more gospels in the Pseudepigrapha that may or may not have also been written by his disciples. And then really it was Paul, which is why a lot of people refer to modern Christianity as being Pauline Christianity, because it's the Christianity that Paul brought to people. Paul sort of made Jesus Christ into a big deal. So basically, it wasn't until he came around that anyone in the world really cared about Jesus Christ. So it is entirely possible that to both the Jews and the Romans, he was just this annoying little prophet who irritated people, and they had to kill him. And he just wasn't a big deal yet. And so there was no reason to mention him at the time. And of course, after Paul took it, then of course people started mentioning him, but they weren't mentioning precise anecdotes of back when he was alive. They were referring to his teachings, to things other people wrote about him. So was he really historical? I don't think there's ever really any way to know. He certainly has as much said about him as some other historical figures. We don't question them probably because they weren't as big a deal. I mean, there's pharaohs that were a big deal, and we have trouble telling, did they really exist? Or rather, were they really pharaohs at this time, or were they at this time, or were there 2 pharaohs at the same time? You know, there's all sorts of little debates that we wind up having about these great leaders, which a lot of stuff was written about. So, you know, it's always hard to tell with historical figures. The further and further you get away from a point, the more mythological they could be. For myself, I couldn't care less. And again, I say that with reverence too. I don't mean that I don't care about what Jesus Christ said or who he was, but I don't necessarily care whether or not he existed. Chinese historians, some of them will say that Lao Tzu was really a non-existent person. That his book, the Tao Te Ching, was written by a number of different people, and that all those great sayings were kind of compiled and became the basis for modern Taoism. That could be true. I don't know that it matters. It certainly didn't matter to me when I was studying Taoism. What mattered to me was what was said. See, the truth is, if today we had incontrovertible evidence, someone actually found a very precise document, one document that for some reason everyone could agree on. Maybe some Roman historian who was taking notes when the census was being done in Bethlehem, and actually somehow had his father and his mother's name in him, and his brothers and sisters. I mean, it could have happened. It is possible that some record like that could exist, because he did have brothers and sisters, and maybe something that one of his brothers said, or sister said, or his cousin said, who knows. Would it make any difference? No. All it would prove is that Jesus Christ was actually a person. Would that prove that he was God, or the Son of God, or that he was really divine in any way, or that he died and rose from the grave? No. It would only prove that he existed. So at the end of the day, I think that debates like that are really somewhat superfluous. We don't believe in great teachers, in great prophets, in great people like Jesus Christ and Muhammad and Buddha. We don't believe in them because they're somehow historically proven. We believe in them because something they said resonated with us. And in the end, that's all you have. Things that resonate with you. Whether or not people really exist or not, I mean, come on. I could be computer generated. But, assuming I'm not, I'm the Urban Omnist, and I'll see you guys later. And if you read the extra canonical, thank you. Hello, I'm the Urban Omnist, and I'm not wearing pants. I'm not wearing pants. Hello, this is the Urban Omnist. Me gusta no pants. Hi, this is the Urban Omnist, and some days you just don't want to wear pants. I mean, who wants to wear pants? I'm kidding, I'm wearing shorts.